You have in front of you are essays that were submitted on the 2002 AP exam. Keep in mind, with them being written in 2002, you're talking about a separation of public versus private life. I'm going to let you know right now, there's going to be a ton of Bill Clinton references, just because that's what people were certainly aware of and in the news. So you'll probably get a little tired of hearing, and here comes your Bill Clinton reference, in your fifth straight essay. That's not something that you would hold the person against, that, hey, how dare you use the same example that all the other folks did? Because more often than not, when you're coming up with your own evidence, argument, things of that nature, you're going to be pulling what's well known. So if you read something and you go, wow, that's a really good example, nice job, and then you read it again and again and again and again, assuming the merit of the example is just as good as the first one, you still have to give then the 8th, the 9th, the 50th person the benefit of the doubt that it was still a good example. Same thing with you. Megan writes something, wow, I like that idea, and then it gets used again and again and again. I can't yell at Grant for how dare you use that same example that she used at the exact same time that you were writing, because you certainly don't know what's aware with that. I gave you the rubric, and this is a specific rubric that is getting used for the Kundera prompt. So you'll see as you look over, scores and things like that, like for 8, it says essays earning a score of 8 successfully establish and support the position in relation to Kundera's claim. So the wording on here is pretty typical of the type of stuff that would go for really any kind of essay, but it is tailored to this specific thing. I know we mentioned this at one time, but it's been a while. When you take your AP exam, one person is going to grade each of your essays. So Heath will have one person grade his synthesis, a separate person will grade your rhetorical analysis, a separate person will grade your DRQ, your argument question. Each person only reads one type of essay for like a week. So they're reading thousands upon thousands of rhetorical analysis or synthesis or DRQ essays. Some of them work for the College Board. Most of them are AP English Language Composition teachers.
So you
Yeah.
get,
So
you get that job.
you volunteer for it. I haven't done it.
Do you get paid?
You get. I mean, I don't know if they pay like for. Each test is in a different location. So last I knew, AP English Language was Daytona, Florida. So I think I don't remember if you have to pay to get there or they provide that, but they pay for room, board, food, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, there's no place I would rather be than in a conference room in Daytona Beach in June. Nothing like having AC and no windows while reading more essays. Now, the thing that people always say about, and this is true of any of the classes, is they go, it's like it's a great experience because after like doing that, what is a 9, what is an 8, what is a 7, just because of the amount that you're going through. But I don't feel like doing that. But so most would-be AP teachers, in order to do that, you have to be teaching the course for at least 5 years and then get like certified trained by College Board. But most of them would be high school teachers. This isn't going to be, the English department chair at Yale and then the one at Harvard and then the one here and there. You will have retired college professors are part of like the whole College Board, AP English Language like group committee. They help formulate the tests and things like that. So some of them could be scorers, but for the most part it'd be teachers. But the main thing that they're kind of going to ask themselves 2 questions initially after reading it. One, does it pass? Because if it passes, it's going to be a 5 or higher. If it doesn't, it's going to be a 4 or lower. Then they would kind of go, where does it fit within the anchor scores? The anchor scores are the scores of an 8 or a 6. Scroll on down the page, a 4, and then on the back of to an essay that is a 4, so essays earning a score of a 4 respond to the prompt inadequately. They may have a difficulty establishing a position in relation to the claim, unconvincing evidence, or insufficiently developed. The writing generally has some immature control. So generally, if it's a 4, you're going to be going, it's inadequate. If you essay of a 6, they're going to go that it is adequate, which I think is a terrible word to use to describe an essay. Emma? Adequate. Yeah, good enough. You didn't mess up too much. Adequate. And then essay of an 8, they use the term appropriate in this case. that there's appropriate evidence and well-developed and that it's cogent. Essentially, what they would be arguing when it comes to an 8, that you would have an effective essay. So you decide it passes, then do you go, all right, it passes, is this adequate or appropriate, and then you kind of go from there. But the main anchors are that 8, that 6, that 4, that 2. Then you can kind of decide with the nuances, all right, is this a 6 or is it a 7? Is this an 8 or is it a 9? Generally, the arguments for an 8 and a 9 would be pretty much the same. The arguments for a 7 and a 6 would be pretty much the same, but the control of writing is more mature in those higher scores. So Zach, Emma both have adequate arguments. Zach's language is a little more sophisticated. He could get the 7, you could get the 6. What can be difficult for some, and this is oversimplifying it a little bit, Megan and Jesse have 2 essays. Megan's argument is more sophisticated, more specific, better evidence. You have better word choice, you have better stylistic control. You look at it, no offense, Megan, they go, boy, that kid can write. You get a 7, she gets an 8, and you're like, wait a minute, what's going on? I thought I could write, but her ideas are better. So more often than not, it's the argument, it's the evidence that kind of determines where your main place will be, and then the style can kind of influence it. Now, it could certainly vary. Maybe her argument is just a little bit better than yours, but it's not quite going to be in that effective range, so she's going to be at a 7, and you're kind of at a 6 and all that stuff. So they constantly have the prompt. They obviously have the prompt. They have the rubric that they're looking at. They also get what are called anchor essays, where they would have an example of a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8, and a 9. So that as Chandler's reading one and grading it and like, well, is it a 6 or is it a 7? He would have those reference points to look at and could go, well, is it better than that one or not? You know, if it's not better than that 6, then I have to keep it in the 6. They don't do 6 pluses, 6 minuses, any of that stuff. A 6 is a 6, a 7 is a 7. So you could have a strong 7, a weak 7, but they're both going to be a 7. You'll never know what you got on your essays.
Really?
Sorry, Megan. All you'll know is, yay, I got a 5. I got a 4. You don't know what you got on your essays. You won't know how many questions you got right on multiple choice. You'll just get an overall score. I'll get some information to let me know as a group, and as a group it wouldn't be 4th period, it would be North Hills, what our average score was for each of the essays, but there won't be anything going, Nina got this, Emma got that, Zach got this score. It's just, well, we averaged here, or we had this many in the upper quarter and this many in the bottom quarter, but we won't know the specific, nuances of your scores.
So you only get 1 score for everything?
Right, so for your test, you get a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5. So you'll only get that final score. You won't get a breakdown as to, boy, if I had only done a little bit better on my multiple choice, my 3 could have become a 4, or thank goodness I did so well on my multiple choice, I now have a 4, whereas I would have had a 2, based on my essays. You won't have that data. I'm sorry.
What was your average last?
Like the average
Class
score. The average would have been, it was a 3 point something. I want to say last year was maybe like a 3.7 or so, which was pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Generally, and it can vary, generally somewhere between 86, 90% pass. What really changes are the number of 5s. That kind of bounces all over the place. So one year could be just a couple 5s, one year could have like 10 5s. And I think that's really where the decimals vary. Generally, I like it that of the group that passes, half of that group have a combination of 4 and 5, other half be 3s. Pretty content with that. But you could take the 2019 questions and then you could look at the 2016 questions and go, well, if I would have had those, I would have had perfect ideas and all that kind of stuff. So it is what it is. Don't worry about it too much. But you can see what the rubric is. So this would basically be the basis of what the scores would be. For the SH2 would also be an anchor score. So this is kind of where they start as to what category does it fit in. So if it's an essay of a 2, generally speaking, you would be saying that this is an essay of little success. There's not a whole lot going on for it. It's not working. You have the rubric for what constitutes a 2, because we know this is going to be a 2. I would say it fits the bill quite, and everyone loves the title, so the first one you go, oh, followed by, why do they have that? Well, they just give them random letters to keep them completely random. We don't want to have essay A, because then people go, oh, A must be the good one. Z must be the bad one. So just by having random letters and all that kind of stuff, when you take a look at them, you're not thinking in your head, okay, that's going to be a 9, that's going to be an 8, a 7, 6, all that kind of stuff. The first 4 essays, so the first 3 are on your first page, and then the fourth one begins on the page and then goes on to the second. The first 4 essays are all anchor scores, meaning a 2, a 4, a 6, and 8. So we don't have a 7, we don't have a 5, we don't have a 3, a 9, a 1. These are all going to be an 8, a 6, a 4, or a 2. So we're going to do like the first 4 together. Tomorrow, more after your literary term quiz, I'm going to give you some time to read them, where you can then take a look at it and go, all right, what is, is this one a 5, is this one a 7? But just want to kind of take a look at them today, talk about them, you get used to it so that you get a feeling, a sense as to how this ultimately works. So, does not get a 7, because then we'd have 007 as our first essay. That'd be cool. And then you could drive off in your Aston Martin.
There was a car that pulled up at the front of the high school. We were walking back from the middle school from Jasmine, and the license plate was James Bond 1, and there was 007. I'm like, oh yeah, James Bond's signature Dodge Dart.
Nothing says undercover British like a Dodge Dart. What if you were in a Mini Cooper?
It's close enough.
Yeah. This would be. See Bond driving around in a Mini Cooper.
Smart car.
Tesla. That's the next generation.
Bond would try it.
The division, yeah, Tesla would work.
Yeah.
The division between the private and public life and the individual is an important barrier that should not be tampered with. As Kundera asserts, private and public life are 2 essentially different worlds, and that differences is the indispensable condition for a man to live free. The consequences of personal life being brought under the scrutiny of the public eye, or even the consideration of personal matters and public decisions, can be costly for everybody, not necessarily just the individuals involved. Any reactions to the intro?
Pretty good.
I mean, do they take a position?
Yeah.
The main thing you're looking for in the intro is, do you take a position? It's an important barrier. It should not be tampered with. It's certainly going to be a main thing. And then the consequences of personal life being brought under scrutiny of the public eye, or even consideration personal matters, can be costly for everyone, not just the individuals being involved. The trickiest thing, I think, on any AP essay, synthesis, rhetorical analysis, DRQ, is having a focused argument where this is what you say you're going to do, and then you deliver the whole way through. It can be tricky because you might read something and then start to write and not know what your argument's going to be yet, so you have to work it through. Or you could come up with an idea, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of her third paragraph, Emma comes up with a new idea, which is a really good one, and introduces it, but it wasn't part of what you said that you were going to do, so it can kind of disrupt the focus a little bit. Keep in mind, it is understood that you are writing a draft. They're not looking at it as being a final copy. So a 9 would still have some revisions that he or she would want to make in their essay. It just means it's still a really good essay. An example of private lives that should not have been considered related to public life is that of former Presidents Clinton, Kennedy, and Roosevelt. Although all 3 of these presidents are considered to have done an exceptional job while in office, their public life, all 3 of these presidents also indulged in extramarital relationships. Another example is Martin Luther King, who indulged himself privately as well. If these 4 great leaders had all been judged purely on a personal private level, each one could be made out to be quite a bad person. However, history had recorded them as being the most influential, in a good way, men of their times. Heath, what are you highlighting?
Where he says if they were based on purely on personal, private level, each one could be made out of quite a bad person.
Okay.
And
So do you like that, or are you highlighting that as, ooh, you moron, why'd you do that?
no, I like that he was establishing how based on like how they performed in the office or however, like what they actually did, kind of made them be seen as an influential figure. However, if we were to base them on their personal life, they would be not good.
Okay, they'd be flawed,
Yeah.
which you could probably say of just about, everyone. Do we like how that first body paragraph's going? Like, is there appropriate evidence or adequate evidence?
Yeah, I feel like it's a little like underdeveloped,
Yeah.
It's
but
kind of weird, but
like it's good examples.
What?
And also it's direct.
And this is a good thing to always kind of keep in mind, because if you were to make some changes to it, what would you do? Like, what would take this as being appropriate / adequate and go, wow, that's really effective? Like, and not completely changing their examples, but what would be things about Clinton, Kennedy, Roosevelt, King that you would want to add to it to make the reader go, wow, that really is an effective evidence argument that you have going on?
Could go into specifics about the good things that they did with their public life.
Okay.
He pretty much just said they were all really good people and did really good things.
But we don't know why.
Yeah.
Okay, yep, that would be good. Anything else?
Like how the public reacted
Okay.
about like the private life, saying that each one could be made out to be quite a bad person, kind of saying like these this is how the press reacted this time as opposed to this time.
Okay, yeah, no, yeah, so pretty much, not only mentioning what the good things, but then what impact did it have upon the public? Because notice in their argument, this can be costly for everyone, not just the individuals involved, but for pretty much the populace in general. So why is it that the fact that these presidents and King, how did their private lives, the exposure of private lives, possibly impact other people as well? Are you surprised by any of the names that he includes or she includes?
I've never heard of Martin Luther King.
Not that you've never heard of him, but never heard of.
him in my whole life. No,
Okay.
him having extramarital.
I've heard about that, but I haven't heard of
I did
Roosevelt.
not hear that.
And you could, well, with Roosevelt, you could be going, which
Which Roosevelt?
one? Who are we talking about? Is this Teddy? FDR? And this isn't to say that they are wrong, that they're fabricating, that they're making things up. I believe they're making reference to FDR. FDR, and I don't know if it's ever been, proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, but there have been rumors and theories certainly about him having extramarital affairs. King, FBI was basically following him at all times, and so as the years have gone by, there's been more and more documents released about, dirt that they had on him and whatnot during civil rights movement. So it's not going that they're being inaccurate with any of their argument, but they're pretty general with the examples that they're using. It'd be nice to at least get a little bit more detail behind it. The difference between personal and public life can also be seen in examples of something simple, names. When in the classroom, a student is required to maintain formally to a certain extent by referring to a teacher as Mr. and Mrs. This is the public life of the teacher. However, if a student were to become good friends with the teacher's child, then Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so might ask that the student refer to them on a first-name basis when coming over to their house. This would be totally appropriate, however, once back in the classroom, it would not be. You will never be friends with my children. I'm glad we've established that, Graham.
Yes.
Children are kind of young to be friends with us.
Yes.
My point,
Yeah.
exactly.
Nina can come to a basketball game to cheer him on if she wants, but we're not
Only
friends.
Nina.
Only me.
Only Nina. Only Nina.
Friends with my mom's old students.
You're right. You are friends with like Rachel and like everyone at Westview who had your mom.
How do you think about this paragraph in comparison to the first?
Not as developed.
Okay.
Not as focused.
It's a little awkward.
I'd say it's a little weaker.
And it's one where I read it, I know what they mean, and probably, being, teacher, kind of helps with it, but they don't really go into detail about example. This would be nice if there was like a personal anecdote to back it up, or if like, say, a sibling were friends with, someone, or, like friends with my mom's former students, where you could kind of see how that barrier could be a little bit different. There might be situations where you could be in public places and see, teachers, whether it be, at Brewster's. Hey, Mr. Kane. Hi, Mr. Crownover. How are you? And conversations. I could see it being interesting. Say you went to, church, temple, synagogue with teacher, And that could be kind of a different dynamic, you know, say you're, you know, working part of youth group or whatever, where it'd be more, you know, Joe, Bill, as opposed to Mr. So-and-so, and then kind of having that dynamic switching kind of in the school day.
If you see them,
That'd be so weird.
what if you like, when you're older, like, whenever I'm like 25 and I see you, it'd be kind of weird to just be like, yo, Mr. King, what's up?
Actually,
That's what happens.
older students.
I was in the restaurant on Saturday. Hey, Mr. Kane,
Yeah, but
hey, come over.
call their teachers
How many-
Mr. and Mrs.
I mean, I can see why they do that.
I don't
but I feel like.
Well,
I feel like
it's kind of normal in the sense that that's how you're used to referring to people. What will become not will become strange, but instances would be like, say, graduation parties. So I go to your graduation party, and there's a kid that graduated 5 years ago who's also there. You know, you might be more apt to go, "Thanks for coming, Mr. Kane," because you know just came from like school, we're still using it, and then kid who's older, you know, I might talk to in a different manner or something like that. There was one, it was a graduation party where, oh geez, I don't remember how old the person was. She was probably 27 or so at that point. She introduced me to her fiance, you know, and I said, "Hey, call me John." "Oh no,
Oh no.
it's Mr. Kane," you know, kind of thing. So it certainly would depend upon the individual, the circumstance and all that, but if you're used to referring to someone, you know,
Yeah.
like
His middle name is John.
Mrs. Kane last year and this year, right? That you had, yeah, you know, Grant, Nina, I think, Emma, I think, you know, it'd be to have like, say, a teacher 2 years in a row and then all of a sudden switch. That's hard to do. But this example doesn't really go into those kind of nuances. They introduce the topic, but they don't really get into the detail about it.
They also don't say how it would be costly for everybody, because like their intro makes it seem like it would be bad. In this paragraph, they're just like
It's awkward.
It would be
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's one of the nice things about their intro, that they have that concept, they just never really address it at any time. So you're like, oh well. The consequences of tearing the curtain down between the private and professional or public life of a person can be very harmful to all those involved. This could be seen as exposure of Clinton to the public brought about a lengthy impeachment trial that halted any important legislation that needed to be passed. What did they do there?
They went into
More
detail about
specific in
how it was costly.
exam.
Costly to everyone. How was it costly? It kept important legislation from being passed that could affect other people. Just as calling a teacher by a first name in a classroom would be totally inappropriate. This goes to show that Milan Kundera was accurate in his analysis of Jan Prochazka's exposure. The private life of a person should remain private. That left a sour taste in Emma's mouth.
What, was that the conclusion?
Yes. And what sometimes happens with conclusions is they turn into final body paragraphs and then kind of a wrap-up. That could be, and this is speculation, that could be more common with this one, because what question number is this? Question number 3. Chances are for most people it would be their final essay. Now you can answer in whatever order you want, but you have probably a lot of people who are under the gun trying to finish off, you know, this response. So kind of combining a body paragraph and a conclusion is certainly not, you know, out of the ordinary. Does it pass?
Yeah.
Okay. They have an argument. They have appropriate evidence for it. Is it adequate? Is it effective?
Adequate.
So we would have a consensus that it would be a 6,
Yeah.
and it is a 6. So now this is like the barometer for kind of everything else. If you're going, this essay passes, but is it as good as O? Is it better? Then you kind of go, well, if it's better, it's got to be a 7. If it passes, but it's not as good, it has to be a 5, because you're not going to have any other 6s. People use masks to hide what they are going through privately. When one is in public, manners are evident and one tries to impress others. When one lets someone into their private world, it is different. The person can relax and be themselves and don't feel that they have any obligation to impress another. I agree with Kundera's claim that the private and public worlds are very different and one should not try to reveal both in another person's life. People make mistakes. It is that simple. When a person does something privately, it shouldn't be a public issue. One example of this happened very recently with our former President Clinton and his intern. They had a private sexual relationship. The media found out and made something that was supposed to be private into public knowledge. The media didn't have to know about his mistake. It destroyed his credibility just like it did to Prochazka. Now, instead of being known as a president who did wonders for the United States, he will be remembered as the president who had a scandalous affair with someone. That was his private business, and the media should not have brought this out into the open. In private, we may talk about people, but since it is private, we expect people not to know. Private life should stay private. Everybody has made mistakes and have private things in their closet. No one should know that the private things are skeletons. One doesn't even have the right to reveal another's private issues, even if they reveal theirs. The only person allowed to reveal personal info is the person himself. One needs to keep those two worlds separated. What'd you say?
No, it's the first week
No.
after the-
Well, so wait, there's not gonna be another 6.
There's not another 6.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be the 8, so I guess
I
the
think it's
4.
Well, and the first, and I mean, you kind of know, okay, it's not going to be a 6, so it's probably an 8 or a 4 kind of thing. By reading it, are you going, this is a passing one that is at least in competition for a 5, or there's not enough?
I don't think so.
I feel like there's not enough.
I mean, what's their example?
The one
Clinton, do you have-
Only one example.
Do you have anything beyond Clinton and his intern? Not really. Do you have anything going on in this body paragraph? Not really. If anything, if it's private, it should be private. I do think they have an interesting idea that it would be nice if they developed a little bit. When it makes reference that people will wear masks and try to hide some things from other people, but that's not an idea that they really kind of go into detail about. So they introduce a neat idea, but it's not one that ever really kind of develops. The writing. How would you characterize the writing, like syntactically, stylistically?
Lacking.
Not great.
I don't
Really?
wanna-
I was
don't
gonna
wanna-
say I feel like
I
it's
don't
well
wanna say
written.
immature sometimes, but like it seemed.
I
it-
agree.
It seemed lacking compared to at least the topic sentence of the one that we read.
Yeah.
I think it's consistent.
I do think it is
It's
pretty
okay.
consistent. I think they tend to do a lot of telegraphic sentences where you have like 5 or 6 words. People make mistakes. It is that simple. Private life should stay private. People use masks to hide what they're going through privately. Now, they do have lengthier sentences as well, but for me, reading it, it feels choppy. Like there's not a unity. Short sentences can be effective. Short sentences are great, I think, for like thesis statements and whatnot, because it emphasizes a point, it's clarity. But if you have a run of those kind of choppy sentences, you never really kind of get a flow taking place. So this one does get a 4. And I have no qualms with that, because I think if you take a look at it compared to, the evidence is not there. Clinton versus Clinton, Kennedy, Roosevelt, King, weird teacher example. Still better than not having, any example whatsoever. I don't think I is gonna be much of a shocker. You just take a look at it and go, Take a look, though, actually, so far as what it does, as to why it would earn a 2. Milan Kundera claims that we all act like Prochazka. He says in private we badmouth our friends and use coarse language, that we act different in private than in public is everyone's most conspicuous experience. This we all know to be true, which is why Kundera states that private and public are 2 different worlds. Kundera is alluding to the fact that we act completely different when in public than in private. Kundera says that the 2 worlds should remain separate. Kundera thinks that people should have a right to have their private life separate from their public one. They have a right to say whatever they want when they are in private. Kundera thinks that people should not tamper with other people's private lives, such as was done to Prochazka. Kundera thinks that this is the real crime rather than what Prochazka said.
What was the summary of what?
It's a total summary. So it's a simpler task than coming up with an argument because it's a summary of it. The writing is pretty inconsistent, unless they're using anaphora, but I don't think that's what was going on in their mind. But the main thing would be they substitute a simpler task, move the whole thing, as opposed to coming up with an argument, they basically summarize it. I would say this is a person who probably read it and went, don't know what I'm supposed to do here, so.
Or they were crunched for time, I feel.
Could have been crunched for time. I think they would have at least made a little bit more of a claim to it if they were crunched, but it is conceivable too, and hey, they got a 2. You got something as opposed to absolutely nothing. So tomorrow, literary term quiz, member metonymy through plot, and then we'll take a look at the other responses. We know that triple C gets an 8, but we'll take at least a look as to why it gets an 8. 3. So if you were not here yesterday, first they kind of have gotten worse. So first essay, the double O, we gave a 6. Then we went down to a 4, which I don't think really had too much complaints about with the 4. And then the 2 was basically a 2 because they essentially summarized the prompt, the passage, as opposed to actually kind of developing any type of argument. For Triple C, we didn't really get a look at it all that much, and we don't really have a whole lot of time to look at it today, but the opening to it is pretty standard, along with what the other ones have been doing, where they've been defending the Kundera's argument. When you go on to the second, and again, they'd obviously be different prompts. You don't get 3 cracks at the same prompt, but if you were able to do something along the lines of what Double O did on your remaining 2 essays, you pass. So if you do page, so it starts at the bottom of the first page, moves on to the second. I want to just mention a couple things with it that the person does. They certainly take a look, again, defending the argument, and they feel that if you're a curtain ripper, basically you are going to be a criminal. They end up having like kind of 3 main examples that they use for it. So they have first one here that starts off with very similarly, I can't say the word. Josh, how do you say the word?
What?
See, exactly. Yeah. We'll just say simile and get you in your literary term quiz, Mike. That was good.
Very similar.
That word. I encountered a situation which resembles that of Prochaska's, which I will regret forever. My best friend confided in me that he truly loves a girl in our class and would do anything to go out with her. Oh, this never ends well. He trusted me with this information, and I believed that I was someone to confide in. Needless to say, I broke his trust and told a friend who in turn told the girl. He felt as naked as Prochachka did when the tapes were released to the public. Kundera's claim that curtain rippers are criminals could not be more true. That day I felt like a criminal. I stole my best friend's innermost thoughts and feelings and sold them to the highest bidder. This is an experience that significantly changed me and one that I will never forget.
Jeez, it's a very low stakes thing to
That was like a 9.
learn a life lesson from.
What do you think about that, like isolated in a vacuum, what do you think about that one example?
I think
I guess it works.
It was
but
like
I feel like it's exaggerated.
Well, I think it was a good example,
Yeah.
but I think he did a good job of relating it to the situation.
Okay. Some folks, go, well, he uses the word I, or whoever the writer is. Keep in mind, it's a personal story, it's a personal anecdote, so I wouldn't have any kind of problem with that. It'd be better than the writer was confided, with and all that kind of stuff. Some folks look at it as it's a little simplistic. Maybe there's some exaggeration taking place. Did it truly happen? I'm going to give the kid the benefit of the doubt that it did happen. Certainly could see something like it. I certainly wouldn't go, okay, conclusion, I'm done. But it's a nice, relatable example because what other example is going to get used? Because this example always, and you can, hey, right there, you see the name Bill Clinton is going to show up. So it's nice that there is at least something that's a little bit different with it. The one that I really liked, and is going to be beginning of this next paragraph, even though the spelling gets a little off. Not only is it clear that Kundera's claim is irrefutable, but our lawmakers pass laws keeping the same principle in mind. In our country today, we have laws that protect speech with religious clergy and attorney-client privilege. These 2 laws are based on the belief that people must be able to share their innermost thoughts, feelings, and actions without the possibility of self-incriminating. If one sins, it's important that they're able to tell someone about it without their sin being made public. If you were to strip all humans down, we're all the same, flesh and bones with many imperfections. Why should we publicize others' imperfections, yet mask our own? To me, this is the all-time hypocrisy. One person who was publicly humiliated and torn apart in front of an infatuated rumor-spreading media was former President Bill Clinton. And the thing to kind of keep note here with Clinton, the big complaint that we had about the earlier essays is good example, but there's not a whole lot of explanation as to how, why it really fits with the prompt. Granted, we can all say that in the eyes of society, what Mr. Clinton did by having an affair was wrong, but if we are to expose Mr. Clinton, why not expose the millions of other Americans and people throughout the world who are unfaithful to their spouses? I was bitterly disturbed and outraged by Mr. Clinton's actions, yet I was even more outraged at the American media. Just because someone happens to be in the public eye doesn't give the world a right to scrutinize his or her private life. If Mr. Clinton was incapable of carrying out his duties as president, remove him. However, if we simply do not approve of his private life, we should all take a good hard look in the mirror before we have the temerity to publicly criticize others' life. So I think with that one, whether you agree or disagree with it, it doesn't matter, but they at least explain how Clinton ties in more so than Clinton, Kennedy, and Roosevelt are examples of this. So is Martin Luther King. Moving on to Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, should you become friends with their kids? So there's an explanation that's taking place. Really, how many examples do they have? Like, how many types of evidence? I'd say that they have, well, I'd even go a little bit further, and I think you could even say 3, where you have the personal anecdote. They don't go into as much detail about it, but the religious clergy and attorney-client privilege, I think, is a nice one. It's not a very, and I don't mean this in a backhanded comment way, it's not a very sophisticated example, meaning you don't go, wow, no one else would have thought about that. But based on the essays that we've read so far, small sample size, no one else thought about it. So it's not out of the realm of possibility to think of it, but it's another thing to think of it and include it, as opposed to after the AP exam, oh, that would have been a good idea. And you usually come up with your best ideas after you turn something in, after you hit submit. And then you have the Bill Clinton example, which is going to go for number 3. So while there's only 2 body paragraphs, there's still 3 specific examples. And certainly I think you take a look at double O being adequate, I would have to look at this one and go, yeah, that's appropriate. If we had read this one first, would we have called it an 8? Maybe, I don't know. But knowing that double O is a 6, I think it becomes pretty clear as to why now this one has to receive the score of an 8. All right. Here's what we're going to do. You got 5 more essays. I'm going to give you a little while here to read them. Shouldn't take you too long, but we'll see somewhere in like that 8 to 10 minutes. You got double K, you got V within the English language, and will be viewed as being scoreable. So yeah, take a little bit of time, read over them, and then we'll discuss them. So double K.
What a great,
It does need to be read out loud to be fully appreciated. We won't do this for all of them. The writer Milan Kundera makes the claim that public and private are 2 different lives, and anyone who pulls the curtain between the 2 is a criminal. I agree. Clear argument being taken. It's sad that just 2 years after this passage was written, the same case came up on a much larger scale, the Clinton scandal. It was not the business of the Republicans or the people of the United States to know if Clinton had a sexual relationship with anyone. I'm thinking a Democrat wrote this. They call out Republicans. Lowercase Republicans, but Republicans. That could be some sophisticated syntax that they are using Republican in lowercase to, in their mind, demean the Republicans. 9 screams it. This is why one's no apostrophe. That's unfortunate. This is why one's sexual organs are sometimes referred to as private parts, not public parts. And it's not just that it's everything one doesn't freely tell people. The author says it is the very ground of the life of the individual. Once you lose that, you have nothing. The example given in the writing is a perfect example of the previous statement. That's deep. It describes 2 friends, apostrophe, growth in writing, conversations being broadcasted on the radio. Not only were their private lives lost, but they were discredited publicly and lost public respect. If I'm the president... This is one of the anger bills. And I want to tell you about my kids' drinking problems, I will. But to go behind my back and tell everyone without my permission is unethical, and you, Heath, truly are a criminal.
The person reading it was probably well, they called me a criminal.
Anyone know what he means? And I'm sorry that I assume it's a he, but it just sounds like a he argument. Yeah. So remember, this is 2002. Shortly after Bush gets elected president, and this is when social media kind of starts to blow up a little bit. There's pictures of his kids who are in college at University of Texas, basically at a keg party, and they are underage. So he calls out the Republicans. The Democrats get hold of this, and what kind of man is leading the country if he can't even lead his own family properly? So he doesn't say Bush, but I'm guessing that's who he's addressing. All kidding aside, score of this one is a 3.
That's remarkable. The fact that you can have an answer like that and it's even a 3.
I mean,
well,
it
but
makes
like when you
sense.
take a look at the other ones, you know, you
Yeah.
really do have to go, yeah, it's a 3.
It's funny, but I mean, it's not total
It's like-
garbage.
Yeah.
Well, no, and like there is an like it benefits. There is an argument. There's 2 main points of evidence. Now they're drastically underdeveloped. There's not a control of writing, a structure taking place, you know, that's definitive. I mean, it's only 1 paragraph. We can't dress this up and make it seem as if, you know, this is the next great manifesto. The potential would be there that you could do something. If you were given this, I bet you folks could make some edits and within 10 minutes make it a 5. That it could pass. And edit so far is probably more of a Word document separating paragraphs and things like that. But like when you compare it to, you know, the 2 that you had before where it's just summary, there's an argument, there's examples, there's understanding of the passage taking place. The big thing, and certainly I don't want you aiming for this, if you wrote this, what do you need to pass the essay portion of the test on your next 2 prompts? You start off with a 3. What do you need to still pass? The essay part. Not worried about multiple choice. Because your total score on the essays in order to pass 3 essays would be a, well, if you averaged a 5 would be a 15. So what do I need to get to 15 on my next 2?
2 6s.
I need 2 6s. So something where, not that you are going to write this essay, but if you have something where you're going, oh, I mean, I don't know, I think it's a 3, that doesn't mean that you are, you know, figuratively dead at that point on an AP exam. You could still certainly rebound. And I think you're beginning to become comfortable and confident enough with your multiple choice that you know that's not going to be an albatross, it's going to be weighing you down. Had to throw that in there for some reason. But it'd be something that you could certainly, you know, overcome and maybe even kind of use to your advantage. So this one gets to 3. I don't we're KK essay. What's our ranking of those?
I said V was a 5.
Yeah.
I said triple L was a 9.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not putting these down as these are the final scores, but we're getting V as a 5.
I said V was a 9 and
You went V with a 9. Okay.
and N was a 5.
Okay. So anyone go with a 7
I said 9 and
Yeah, I went with 7
for V? Okay. Because I knew if we did this enough, we'd get all the scores. And
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of arguments, but I feel like it's just that it's like quantity over quality. Like, there's a bunch of arguments that are not like fully developed, and half of them are just like statements. And there's a lot of, I mean, there are public or private like experiences, but I still feel as if they're not really elaborated on.
so your term is quantity over quality.
I see.
Yeah, now looking
Inconsistent
at
and
it-
underdeveloped. Okay. And we're not trying to pressure you into going.
No, I was stuck between 7, 9, but honestly now I'm thinking more 5 because I feel like triple L is like triple L and double N are better.
Seductive in the sense that, boy, look at all the examples that they're throwing out there. And I think V is honestly probably a very good writer. I think V is just so scattered that all the little paragraphs don't really link up as well. There's not that flow, fluidity, rhythm, continuity the same way that you have with triple L. I would refer to V as being constipated. They have a bunch of ideas, but they're all stuck. You know, nothing's coming out. Think about that one for a little bit. Right before lunch. For some of you, maybe. Good, me too. They have really good ideas, and I think if you picked, you know, 2 of those, compare it to Triple C, the one that we gave the 8, I think their examples go into more detail, and I think the control of writing overall is stronger than what the 8 had. Doesn't demean the 8 in any way, but I just think L. On to the next page, there's triple L, triple D, and then on the very, there's no dashes. All a surprise to anyone that triple D is the one that gets a 1. I think it was a surprise to you when you turned the page, as Jesse was saying, and there was a new essay. Wow, what a great intro. Oh. And so in that stance, you know, there's really not much of an argument, evidence really kind of taking place. Not again that the 2 one did, but yeah, there's not really just a control of writing at that point. So at this point, we're talking about triple L, and then we're taking a look at V that was below. You gave 7 to L's.
Yeah.
You said 9. Emma, what'd you do?
I said
You said 9. Okay, so we're in between a 9 and a 7. Anyone go 5? Nope. And why can't they go VV for us? Okay. Triple L is one that people really sometimes have problems with for the same reason that Heath and Jesse were just kind of talking about. In Testament Betrayed, Milan Kundera accurately emphasizes the need for separation between the public and private lives of a man. Exploitation of a man such as Prochazka in his most private, most vulnerable, most candid state is an outrage. Kundera considers this exploitation a rape of his life that is not to be condoned. The indispensable condition, the fundamental decency, is to respect the disparity between public and private, to leave the separating curtain alone rather than tear it away and enact a heinous crime. Celebrities and those with a wealth of fame are the usual victims of an invasion of privacy by the press, some of whose invasions resulted in devastating tragedies. In politics, mudslinging is the ultimate invasion of one's past and present life and makes the leaders of America out to be treacherous fools. However, in some instances, an invasion of privacy actually helps a person in gaining fame and fortune. What stance do they take? Like, what do they ultimately do?
Turning down the curtain is not.
I'm sorry?
Turning down the curtain more like invading people's privacy.
When do they defend, refute, or qualify? Defend.
Yeah.
I would say they lean, but they ultimately qualify. Because there's this one little thing that, what do they throw out at the end? An invasion of privacy actually, it can. For the most part, it hurts. But there are instances, it's kind of like an exception to the rule, there are instances when it can help. I'm not going to read the whole thing word for word, but first paragraph. Television shows such as Extra E and Access Hollywood and tabloids epitomize the antithesis of what Kundera idealizes in the world. Person has a pretty nice vocabulary.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
They completely invade the private lives of celebrities, often to discredit and mock them. The life of Home Alone child star Macaulay Culkin was fully chronicled in the tabloids in his dealings with his money-stealing parents and early marriage. Publicized his painfully tumultuous private life. I like tumultuous. John F. Kennedy Jr. similarly tried to avoid the press and resented their invasion of his private life over publicizing his marriage. Princess Diana, a heroine in her English homeland, was a tragic victim of the paparazzi invasion. Her attempt to flee from a car of news reporters resulted in her sudden death. The invasion of privacy also humiliates celebrities, as in the case of pop singer George Michael's bathroom incident and the charges against legendary Michael Jackson as a child molester. A complaint that folks have is, well, how's this much different from V in the sense that you're getting a whole bunch of like examples, but there's not a big explanation taking place. I think for us it's harder to understand because it's 16 years later, where all of these things would be within the news in the last 4 to 5 years.
Like they would need to
Yeah, and it's not to say that you therefore don't have to explain things that happen today, but they all fit under that idea that wealth and fame, those are the usual victims, and it can result in devastating tragedies or humiliation. All of the examples that they pick deal with devastating tragedies and humiliation. And this sounds, especially coming off of like a take-home essay, maybe not all that impressive. They do what they said they were going to do. It's a complex argument, but they meet it within that first body paragraph. Then they go into the political aspect, mentioning George Bush's daughters, which KK person didn't quite do nearly as succinctly and well. And then they bring in the Clinton-Lewinsky catastrophe, where they don't look at it in the same way with, Bill Clinton being affected by it, but it's more of she had never appeared on television, she had never been recognized by strangers, and she had never been on the front cover of Time, and she attained all of the preceding when the Clinton-Lewinsky catastrophe hit. What happened? She got famous. So for her, it ended up being a beneficial thing, and you could argue in the long run. And this person seems to have a more sophisticated understanding about it. I think V went into greater detail, then the potential could be there that it could turn into a really high quality essay. That term quality there, I'm just going to keep it there, I guess.
The writer of Triple L and see if they talk like that all the time.
They probably don't.
I know.
You know,
But it'll just be fun.
But and it's not that they don't sound like a thesaurus, you know, where they're simply just
Yeah, it's
kind of
all-
throwing it out. They use antithesis at the right time. You know, tumultuous they use at the appropriate time. There was another word that I remember when reading it. I was like, ooh, I like this. You know, the surfacing of such treachery affects the victim's family as well. You know, so they know when to use words. Even something like wielding a wealth of fame. That's a nice little alliterative example to throw in there. So they definitely have appropriate examples. And I would say there is double N. So, not to be confused with but this is you have 5 essays. You have 9 total, all knowing we go a 1 through 9. We've given out a 2, a 4, a 6, and 8. That's who we appreciate. So you know you have 5 more left. Obviously the odd numbers. I would think of it in the way of which one do I look as being the best, which one do I look in the worst, and kind of fill in the middle. But knowing that if you go, this one's the best of the rest, that you're ultimately giving it a 9. The one that you feel is the worst, you're ultimately giving a 1 because those are the only scores that we have available. No 0. Yeah, no. About double N on the last page. Put N at a 9. So we're 7s and 5s. Emma, you went 5, and you went 5. Yeah. Okay. So 5 and 7s. Anyone want to like validate any scores? The Roman numeral, the V one. It gets confusing. N ends up getting a 7. I would say when you take a look at double N, consider this opening paragraph an opening paragraph and really a body paragraph. So they mention clergy, Catholic clergy. They go into the Clinton example. I think those 2 examples supersede double O's, Clinton, Kennedy, Roosevelt, and Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so. So when you look at it in comparison to that one, for me, I think the 7 then starts to make a lot more sense. Still in need of revision, but it's not a poor essay.
Would you say a conclusion is not necessary on a...
The more complete your essay is, the better off you're going to be. If you're running out of time, the conclusion is the first paragraph I'm sacrificing. Because if anything, you could probably work a concluding thought into your last body paragraph.
That's what I felt like the 9 did.
It does. Like, I would not sacrifice a body paragraph for the conclusion. By all means, I would sacrifice a conclusion for the body. But I would still want, like, at least a closing thought.
Yeah.
So that it's not double or triple D when you turn the page and go, oh, they weren't done, or they were done. I didn't realize that.